Welcome back. Yokoso ashitare. Yet again, as you can see, this story is going to be a little bit shorter than usual. That's just how they ended up being. The next several stories are actually going to be pretty short. And unlike the previous story, this one's not a 2-for-1. It's just one short story. And again, the next several of these stories are going to actually be pretty short. I didn't write these stories, I didn't compile them, and I didn't order them. That's just how it's shaken out. But maybe this might be more interesting. Maybe instead of listening to a 20-minute long rambling story about whatever, maybe short, sweet, and to the point is a little more enjoyable. So hopefully you find it to your liking. And I do have to admit, this story isn't actually as overtly exciting as some of the other ones that we've done. That being said, I do still think it's a very, very good one because this and the stories that are going to be coming after it are a fascinating glimpse into what life was like for normal people in everyday Japan when they were dealing with the regular everyday problems that they faced. And because of that, we can see how different they were from us, but at the same time how similar they were. For example, in this story that we're dealing with today, the main character would be a capitalist's best friend. They would love him to death because he's innovative, born rich, and through his innovation and his skill and his efforts, he makes everybody around him happy while also benefiting himself. Just a picture-perfect exemplar of what creativity and free interaction can do for people. But anyway, let's actually get into the story before we start making this too political. So, once upon a time, there was a prince by the name of Prince Kaya. Kaya no Miko, or Kaya no Shin-o, because again, I'm not going to go into the details about how the Chinese writing system was forced into the Japanese language and now things are just weird. But depending on how you read his name, it could be Kaya no Shin-o or Kaya no Miko, which I wouldn't have even called him Kaya. I don't know why they called him Kaya. I would have called him Takayo, but again, it's weird. But he was the son of Emperor Kammu, who was a fairly notable emperor. I believe he was in the early Heian period. I've heard his name. I don't remember what he's famous for, but he's an emperor, suffice to say. But the thing about Prince Kaya is he was exceptionally skilled at craftsmanship. It's surprising to learn that he was a prince because he was so good at crafting things and experimenting with things and making funny little contraptions that one would have thought he was a carpenter's son. But no, he was a prince. And maybe because he was a prince, he had all the leisure and all of their resources to indulge in silly pastimes like inventing, but he was really good at it. The other thing he did, because being a nobleman, when you want to make a name for yourself, one of the things you can do is build a Buddhist temple. Because, good people build Buddhist temples, and good people deserve to have their positions of authority and privilege, so why not build a Buddhist temple? And of course, when you have a Buddhist temple, you gotta make sure that the monks are fed. And the best way to feed the monks is to grow rice fields. So this temple had a rice field out in front of it. The temple was called Kogyoku. Again, I'm not entirely sure how to read it, but the name of the temple isn't that important, so whatever. But one year, there came to the realm a huge drought. The sun was shining for long periods of time, there hadn't been any rain, and the water was drying up. And that was a problem for people trying to grow rice. Rice, if you don't know, at least in the very beginning stages, needs lots and lots of water to grow properly. And when you have a drought, there's not a lot of water. Now, normally, if your rice fields are connected to one of the offshoot rivers or a smaller river that most people don't use, it's not a big deal. Japan is overflowing with water. Water is in abundance here. It's not like a desert at all. However, if your rice field is connected to the Kamo River, which was like the primary river that supported the entirety of the capital, then everybody was trying to get a chunk of that river, and it was far more likely that you were going to run out of water. And it just so happens that this temple Kogyoku was connected to the Kamo River. And so, when this drought came in, things were looking really, really bad for this temple. And so everybody, not just in this temple, but everybody in the capital, all the surrounding areas, were freaking out. Oh no, it's a drought. We're not going to have any food. Things are going to be bad. What do we do? What do we do? Prince Kaya, being a, again, creative and very skilled mechanic, decided he was going to do something interesting. He made a little statue-like thing of a servant boy, girl, something like that. Of a servant child, about 4 feet or so tall. And this statue was holding in its 2 hands a big bucket of sorts, a big container. And it was holding this container high aloft its head. And what would happen is if you filled this container full of water, the water would overflow and pour down in some fashion. It doesn't explain exactly how this works, but it would flow down in some way that it would wash over this statue thing's face. And to be honest, I don't understand fully what it's trying to say here. I don't know if this is a reference to some other Japanese cultural thing that they just didn't explain. I don't know if there were a bunch of moving parts to it that made it really interesting when this happened. I don't know exactly why this was interesting, but apparently this was really, really interesting. You also have to remember that most of the people walking by these fields are not going to have access to a lot of the entertainment that we have now. Most of them were peasants. They woke up at sunrise, they worked their fields, and then they went to bed at night, and they repeated that process over and over and over and over again. If they had free time, it was probably spent doing something like, I don't know, hand wrestling, as we saw in a previous video, or some very basic physical game. Most of the people also couldn't read, so it's not like they could distract themselves with fancy tales about far-off lands. Not that there were tons of them at this time anyway. So in that situation, things that are even a little bit interesting are going to seem far more interesting than they would to us today. But anyway, the point is that this Prince Kaya made a statue thing that if you poured water into it, it would wash over this statue's face, and that was supremely interesting and entertaining. And of course, things started off small. Maybe 1 or 2 people would come, and they would scoop up a bunch of water from their own wells and their own stores of water, I guess. And they would come and they would pour it into this container. And eventually, the container would overflow. It would wash down this statue thingy's face, and it would flow into the rice field. And it started off small again, 1 or 2 people, but then more and more and more, and word spread. More people heard about it. More people wanted to go see for themselves. More people came with their water, and eventually they started pouring water in like crazy, just all over the city. Everybody wanted to go see what this new Prince Kaya invention was. And of course, eventually, the rice field got full. And things went off without a hitch. Rice field saved, day is won, awesome. But the thing about rice fields is you can't just overflow them with water. You need to carefully regulate how much water there is to get the best results. So once the rice field got full, Prince Kaya came in sneakily, probably in the night, doesn't mention, but I'm guessing at night he'd come in, he'd sneak in, and he would take his little contraption and he would hide it. So that way, people wouldn't overflow his fields. And then when the water dried up, he would stick it back out in the field again, and people would come and they would pour water in it, and boom, full rice field of water. And so by doing this, they saved the field. And whenever there was a need for more water or there was a drought, Prince Kaya would bring out his fancy little contraption and use that to secure its safety, secure its bounty. And that's great, because not only did Prince Kaya save the field of the temple that he was sponsoring, but he gave everybody a good laugh and some good times along the way. Awesome. Everybody wins. Score 1 for innovation. And that's kind of what I want to point out here. Is that a lot of people like to split the world into East and West, right? Like there's Western society with its free markets, its capitalism, its human rights, and then you've got the East with its strict adherence to tradition and laws and honor and all of those things. And, you know, they have this dichotomy in their heads, which I don't want to say is born from nothing, but as we can see here, not only was innovation found in ancient Japan a long, long time ago, but it was celebrated. Like, this was a small thing. This was a short story. This wasn't that big of a deal. But whoever compiled these stories thought this story was interesting enough and worthy enough to be included with a bunch of these other stories. And there are some very important stories, some very historically significant stories in this collection. And so despite many of the cultural differences that we may have, and that's partly why I'm so interested in this stuff, is because it's so culturally different from my own culture. But despite all of that, there are some very, very notable similarities that show that we're all still just human. And I find that comparison and that contrasting, I find the similarities and the contrasts extremely interesting. And that's why I'm also making these videos, because I hope you do too. And thus is it said, and thus the people praised Prince Kaya as being a very skilled and clever individual. That's not the best translation of that ending, but it's the best I'm going to do now. It's on the fly. So again, that's the story. thank you for listening. Like I said, it's going to be short. The next several stories are going to be fairly short too. And most of them actually have something to do with highlighting those who are exceptionally skilled at whatever it is they do. In this case, we've got a guy who likes to build stuff and likes to invent stuff. Some of them are going to be about games. Some of them are going to be about arts. But they're really short, and they're just about notable people who live everyday normal lives, as you will see, and I find that incredibly fascinating. So, thank you for listening. Ito katejike no kosoha berikire. But I don't know if that's actually how you say thank you in classical Japanese. As far as I can tell, they didn't really have a way of saying thank you in the same way that we do, but it's close enough. I'm pretty sure the grammar's correct, mostly. So I'm going to keep using it until somebody tells me that there's a better way of saying it. But thank you again. Please, like, share with all your weeb friends and even some of your non-weeb friends, your history buff friends, whoever might be mildly interested in this. And subscribe too, you know? I put these out weekly, and if you want to stay abreast of that, cool. Something you can throw on in the background while you do your laundry or something. But anyway, that will be it for now. Thank you, and I will see you next week. Probably, barring any tragedy or some other unforeseen circumstances, or my just general procrastination. Anyway, bye.